Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Mr. Rayo is up there above me, and to my upper left. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. To my upper right. There you go.
You're the right.
There you go. Is Captain Bill Kirk, who I have to apologize, Bill, because when I posted this morning when I was, on YouTube to kind of promo it, I uh, I had just seen the fact that I believe today is William Shatner's birthday.
Oh, really?
So
Yeah.
so I wrote the
True.
lead in is that where we were gonna. I really did. I wrote the lead as we were gonna have Captain James Kirk on tonight at at, at
I got
seven
an E.
o'clock.
I got an E. Sorry. No,
Yeah,
no, no
and,
shot.
and, and it was up there for about 3 or 4 hours until Joe messaged me and I sent him the link and he said, "You got James Kirk. His name is Bill." So
Yeah, that was a
well,
bucket list item to meet him. And after, 30 some years, I finally met him a few years back and nice guy, but it shouldn't have been on the bucket list probably. So, you know,
hey, you know what?
never want to meet your superhero, right?
No, sometimes, especially if your expectations are high, you could want. There's a high probability that you will be deflated. And by the way, he's 89 today, so
He gets a
you
pass. So.
right, and you are nowhere close. No, neither is Joe and I, although we might be a little bit closer. So you are your company is Weather Trends 360.com.
Yeah, Weather Trends International, and the brand is Weather Trends 360. Yep. You're
Now,
good weather.
Joe has occasionally pulled up something from Weather Trends, and of course, we always like to give full credit, and really appreciate you taking the time out
Sure.
to join us tonight. So you do. I noticed from your website you do a lot of long range forecasting, and this is a subject that always comes up for a number of reasons, and we were talking off before we started how I just have never been able to get my head around it. So, explain how you go about putting together an outlook going out several months or a year or however long you go out for.
Well, the first thing you do is I graduated from Rutgers in 1989, so I think that dates myself. But meteorology, you have to data dump everything you just spent 4 years of college for, because that's physics, fluid dynamics. I was blessed that I got to go to MacDill Air Force Base. Was my first military assignment in the Air Force. So I was a brand new lieutenant. I worked briefly with General Schwarzkopf. If anybody, I say if you're under 35, you have no clue what we're talking about. But Storm and Norman and some other famous folks there at MacDill, and really was just a challenge to think differently, that we need longer range forecasting at that time, out about 6 months. Don't change your mind once you give a forecast. So obviously you got to kind of get rid of all the traditional physics and start to think statistically, climate cycles, long-term things that maybe you can predict. El Nino, La Nina have some influence, but I always say they're one of dozens of things you need to look at. But it fundamentally starts with statistics, right? And I like the easy one. March in the Northeast, when you've had a kind of a standard deviation above average, so a really hot March, what happens the next year? It's just a statistical trend. Well, I think it's about 89 to 94% that the next year is a cold and snowy March. So it's a 90 to 94% chance that the next year is going to be cold and snowy when you've had a really near record hot March. Not a warm one, but a record hot one.
Does that work for Februaries? Because I believe the last four Februaries have been. You have to go back to 14, 15, I think, for the last time we had a below average February.
Right. So the challenge here today, and what we're blessed with Amazon Web Services, because we need a lot of computing power to do this, is it's a trillion times a billion statistics. So it's a lot of math, and obviously no human could do that. So you need computers to be able to do that. So what we actually do is we do a statistical analysis. That's the easy one, but we do it by day for about 32 million spots on Earth. So we're rolling up daily. So again, if a given day meets a rule, March again, I always say that's the easy one to understand. What's interesting about March in the Northeast, after we've had a really cold, snowy March, as we had back in, I think, 17, 18, then we had another one in 18, 19, right? Every March, we had three cold, snowy ones kind of in a row. And then this year, so what's interesting, after you have three cold ones in the Northeast are kind of common, two for sure. So when you have a really cold March, guess what? The next March is usually really cold and snowy. It kind of runs in twos and threes for whatever reason in the Northeast. Now we're doing those statistics not at a monthly level, doing it at a daily level for every location on Earth, every mile. So it's a lot of, you can have some like slight nuances between a New York or Philadelphia. Um, so it's just very different math, right? No human could physically do all that. So you're correct. You could have in the West Coast, for example, it's very common for California to have 7 years of dry weather. It's just common, right? That's a semi-arid environment. They can go 7 years with no rain, or very little rain, little snow.
We just saw
That's
they had a 5 year stretch they just did.
right, and
Uh,
then they
uh,
go 3 years like we're having now, or other than this year, but a couple years of really wet and cold, snowy winter. So again, I always say there's so many statistics. It's like I said, we can't as humans fathom it, but computers can do it all at this stage.
Joe, you go ahead.
No, Bill, I find this all interesting that you do this through computers and through cyclical information. Now, Joe and I know of a few people who do long range forecasts of a different type. For example, we have one fellow here in the lower Hudson Valley that claims that he has been very, very accurate based upon sunspots and also based upon the cycles of the moon. And believe it or not, the cycles of the planets as well. So, what do you think
I
about
have
those
to.
kind of predictive cycles as opposed to what you're doing, or do you just simply say we do what we do and they do what they do, and neither the twain shall meet?
Yeah, probably. Again, the sun has some influence. It's not, the other ones aren't statistics we'd look at, but I just go with that simple math, right? If you have a statistic that says, let's just take today, for example. Today was a really cold day. If the last 2 years on this date were very warm, Joe just said 4 years, right? So let's just say the last 4 years have been very hot on this particular date. Our statistics are going to look at that trend and say, well, what's happened over this period, over the last 125 plus years? In some cases, we have more data than that, but usually about 125 years. And let's just say the statistics said, you know what, you have a 93% chance that today, because we've had four hot, whatever, March
Well, I
23rd.
was talking about the whole month of February when I brought that up before, but let's just to
So we
illustrate
just
your,
we
but to
start
continue your
everything
example with
right.
four
So we're
days.
doing it by day. So let's just assume
Oh,
I don't have the
okay.
daily, but if this date, March 23rd, the last 4 years has been really hot, then the statistics might say you have about a 94% chance that you're not going to have your fifth hot March 23rd. You're going to have a cold March 23rd next year, which is this year, right? So again, if the odds are 93, now sometimes the odds may only be 60% or 65% or 80%. Sometimes they're 100%, right? If you just hit certain trends. Now, the next phase of this is not just the statistics, right? So we start with that because math is math, right? I mean, again,
Right.
how many people on February, I look at NOAA's forecast on February 20th, we were going to be cold and wet for March. And then look at the forecast on February 29th for March from NOAA. And now all of a sudden we were going to be warm. Was the total wholesale change in that NOAA outlook
Well,
just in
right.
9 days, right? So physics analogs, just that methodology just doesn't work in our opinion. It's great for maybe a week or two or three if you're lucky. So the
Well,
next phase of our process is to kind of layer in climate cycles, La Nina, El Nino, PDO, AMO, but we look at them very differently than most people. Most want to try to line up indices today. So all these climate indices today say it should be like 2013, 2056 or 1956, 1902. We don't like that method. We don't think it works. It doesn't work well, at least. So our approach to the analog concept is a little twist in how we do it.
I have often found that well, probably I don't know. I don't want to get myself into too much trouble on this, but it's not like I've never said anything controversial before, right, Joe? So I have found in general, well, when I see long range forecasts popping up, I mean it's become very fairly obvious that the only long range forecast anybody ever makes for a winter season is for the Northeast is below average temperatures above normal snowfall, because any other kind of forecast is blasphemy and heresy, and you will be hung out to dry if you should even so much as go against the grain.
Right.
But so I don't know. I just little by little I just realized that this was actually fairly quickly. I just realized that there's you're sort of wasting your time when you look at some of these forecasts. And the other thing I was going to say with regards to analogs is my other opinion of analogs is that it always seems as if whoever's forecasting it tries to find an analog that meets their bias.
Correct. Yeah.
And so what good is it? And it never comes out. It never even remotely comes out to look anything like the analog is anyway. So I've long wondered the point.
So I have to. So what we do, I always say I take the human. What we've done is basically it's completely 100% automated. I can't change my forecast once I issue it. Right. The statistics for March. So when you had 3 cold, snowy Marches in a row in the Northeast, the fourth year, about 90% chance is going to be hot with a lot low snow.
Okay.
And that's what we've had this year, right? So that was about a 90% ish, depending on your location, chance that this was going to be a warm, snowless March in our area here in the southern part of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. So then all the other climate cycles. But what we've done is we've basically taken that human emotion out of the equation. So even our own guys, right? We got half a dozen meteorologists in the office here in Bethlehem that's now shut down, but they all kind of hit the same thing back in October. Hey, the analogs say it's 2013, 2014, right? And we do our little snow contest in the office, and a couple of our employees said we were going to have 58 inches of snow this year, just in our contest, not for our.
Well, you may have had 58 flakes, depending on where you are in Pennsylvania.
We had about 9 inches, so we had 9 inches.
Right.
So it's way below average. So no, what I like about what we do is that there's no human involvement in here. It's just the statistics and the cycles. They do it. The computer does what it does, and we don't change that forecast. So when even sitting here on February 20th, when Noah said it was going to be cold, yes, we get nervous about March, but end of the day, the statistics panned out, right? So it was a warm, snowless March. So again, I think that's one advantage over, the human, because again, we all love snowstorms and hurricanes, but got to kind of take that bias out.
Well,
the Farmer's Almanac has their traditional every year when they come out, and they always say, well, our accuracy is 75 to 80%. I never was able to understand how they were actually able to brand themselves with that type of accuracy for the United States as a whole, for various sections of the United States, for forecasts that are issued for specific places like every 3 or 4 days and storms and whatever. But for what you do, what can you say for your long range projections in terms of a percentile? How accurate do you believe that you are in a forecast, let's say 6 or 8 or 9 or even a months in advance or even a year in advance?
So our forecasts are rolling year out, right? So we're already producing the March 2021 forecast. So again, everything up until that, up until 2 weeks, when you get into the physics and traditional analog, traditional models, GFS, Euro, everything is not changing. I can't change my winter outlook that I've already issued to all my clients, right? Our clients are huge retail supply sites, so the Walmarts, Targets, AutoZone, Kohl's, JCPenney's on the retail slide, Home Depot, Coca-Cola's, Johnson & Johnson. So it's people either making a seasonal product, they got a plan now for next winter. So most of our retail clients are already in the planning phase for pretty much fall to winter next year, right? So if you tell them anything about this summer, too late. They've already bought all the merchandise. They already know how it's going to be allocated, advertised, markdown schedules, right? All that's set in stone at this stage. So they're already planning, again, in that 10 to 12 month window. So the neat thing about us is that we, unlike a Farmer's Almanac, right? I've never seen a real accuracy document from the Farmer's Almanac. Nothing against them. I love it. I get a book every year, just like everyone else. You have to think about what is it that they're doing, though, right? I mean, their goal is to sell a book, right? An $8 book. That's what they want to do. So if I just tell you, hey, it's going to be the most beautiful winter, dry, snowless winter of all time, I don't need the book, right? So sometimes you have to think through what is the ultimate message of the meteorologist. We actually produce accuracy for all 32 million locations. So I can tell you exactly right now how we just looked at it today. So here so far, February, March, we're trending at about 88% on our precip forecast and about 86% on our weekly temperature forecast. The easiest way to put this into perspective is that what we said a year ago for the, let's say, a 7 to 14 day forecast is more accurate. So if by several degrees, so whatever you're hearing today for 7 to 14 days from now from anybody, including us, because we still use physics within the 2 week window, right? We're using the GFS, Euro, those right. Models that we all use, detrending them to some extent. Whatever we said a year ago for that period, 7 to 14 days from now, is more accurate by several degrees, right? So our own statistics beat long range process beats our own short range process. So again, I just think I believe it's an orderly Earth. it's a lot of corrections and systems and balances. And I say droughts end in floods and floods end in droughts and hot winters end in cold winters, So, I mean, again, it just, there's something there. I can't entirely say exactly how we stumbled on this some 20, 30 years ago, but it works.
Do you do something in your forecasts? Um, do you see, let's say, 8 or 9 months down the road, something that might look like a major weather disturbance, a major storm, maybe a major nor'easter, let's say in the month of November or December? And do you tell your clients we're highlighting or we're red flagging that particular time frame from like the 15th to the 25th of November because we feel that there might be a major disturbance that might disrupt things overall, or do you just simply give a probability outlook saying that November is going to be cold and with more precipitation? Does it go along those lines? Because that's what the almanac does, is they sometimes highlight and tell you that there's going to be a memorable storm on a specific date, or we're going to have a white Christmas this year. But do you go along those lines with your clients, or do you do something a little bit more broad brush or broad based?
Actually, I'd say it's a little more detailed and a little less detailed. So the three things we predict are temperature metrics, rainfall metrics, and snowfall metrics by week. In theory, we do temperature by day. Again, I would never say use our July 4th forecast made a year ahead, but so it's mostly those high-low temperatures, cooling degree days, heating degree days, and growing degree days for farmers are the weekly metrics we predict year ahead for every mile on Earth. Rainfall is by week, so we'll tell you if it's a really wet week, a dry week, and snowfall again varies by week. So what we do from there, though, so those are the metrics. I'm not trying to tell you that they're. So what we'll do is, let's, for example, our late December forecast this year, I believe at the end of December, beginning of January, we have some of the coldest, snowiest, wet weather in, I'm just guessing off the top of my head here, I haven't looked at the exact forecast, but let's say a decade. That's the forecast we have right now for Christmas, beginning of January.
So for December of 20, going into January of 21. Okay,
so what
gotcha.
we're telling clients is that 2-week stretch there, unlike this 2-week stretch, is the coldest, snowiest in 10 years. So it's quantified. It's telling them explicitly the temperature, the snowfall, and the rainfall for that particular period, that location. But from there, we roll it up to predict sales, right? So we're predicting about 10,000 seasonal category sales. So what is that? What does the coldest, snowiest, late December, January mean in New Jersey? Well, for electric blankets, for example, that's maybe a 400% increase in electric blanket sales. Or things like hot coffee, we quantify this with our power of 1 degree that we call it. So every degree colder in the winter, there's about a 2% increase in coffee sales. But there's about a 24% increase in those electric blanket sales. So we're predicting. Wow. So if I know New Jersey, let's say in that late December, January timeframe next year is 15 degrees colder than this year and maybe 5 degrees below normal, I then can predict those sales. So I can tell a Starbucks, for example, that your coffee sales, and theoretically in New Jersey in late December next year, are going to be up 35%. Or conversely, I could be telling some clients, you're down, 15, 20, 30, 40% in a different category. So it's predicting those sales week by week. So you can predict the weather accurately, more accurate than a week 2 short range forecast, then you can actually predict those sales. Now, again, you're going to miss a week. A bad forecast actually happened this year for us where we missed 2 weeks in a row. Ooh, that's a cringe moment for us, and you pray that you hit the 3rd week. So typically we'll miss 1 week out of 4 or 5 or 6, and then our clients are usually pretty happy with that. So that's kind of what we try to do.
Bill, one of our regulars on the live streams, Timothy Veltman, who lives up in upstate New York, he's a regular, and he sent me a message, and he's got a question for you. He says he says you're very good with statistical analysis. If you could ask, in your research, have you found any? And this is I think a very good question, because this has come up from time to time. Is there any statistical correlation between early season snowstorms creating a below to much below average snowfall year? And he brings this up because this year that correlation was there, and it was also there last year, winter of 1819, when we had that November snow. That mid-November snow wound up being the biggest snowfall of the winter for many areas, particularly down here,
Right.
in southeastern New York, New Jersey, Long Island, and southern New England. So that question comes up a lot. We get snowy November. Oh, that means it won't. The rest of the winter's no good. So what are your thoughts on that?
No. So again, if we just look nationally, so again, nationally speaking, November, this past two falls, so let's say mid-October to mid-November, core part of the fall season nationally, were the coldest, snowiest in 21 years. So last year, fall, 2 years ago fall, was again the coldest in 21 years and snowiest in 20 years. And then nationally, this fall that we just had was the coldest in 20 years. So not quite as cold and snowy as that one 2 years ago, but close, very close. And yet we flipped on a dime as we got into December, January, and obviously not much winter. A couple cold blasts. Christmas week prior was a good cold blast nationwide. Martin Luther King Jr. weekend was a good cold blast nationwide, and Valentine's Day. So really, you had three cold blasts, if you want to call them that,
Right.
that last for a few days. So yeah, yes and no. You just have to look at, that's what our process in theory would do, right? It would go in and say, okay, look, whatever. Buffalo, New York's had three brutally cold, brutally snowy, whatever periods in a row. What's this chance of this period next year going to be cold and snowy? Now, the difference I want to caveat here is that we're not looking at seasonal snowfall. I would never encourage you to do that. So you can't just go in and say, hey, look, what does three really cold, real snowy starts in November mean for
Right.
November next year? Now, that's not going to work. Probably not going to work. What we do would be a little different. We'd look at it day by day, roll it up to weeks, and then roll it up to a month. So when someone asks us, Bill, what is your December 2020 forecast? What analog are you using? Well, I'm not. I can say it's the coldest, snowiest in 10 years, but I can't tell you it's most like, 20, 10, right? I can't say that,
Right.
Because there's really no analog method in our process. So he's on the right path, right? I mean, there are ways. That's a good strategy, but it doesn't always lead to what you think it's going to lead to.
So
And sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it doesn't lead. You mentioned several times in the last minute, cold and snowy, cold and snowy. But here in the immediate New York tri-state area, a couple of years ago, cold and snowy didn't work out. We actually had one of the warmest Februaries that we had in a number of years. And yet in the same token, we also had an above normal month in terms of snowfall. In fact, we had near record temperatures one day, and the very next day we had a blizzard. We had some really whacked out conditions here, because I know normally when you look ahead at a specific weather pattern, you look for the cold to go hand in hand with the snow. But like I said, the last couple of years, especially in February, it's been warm, and yet we still end up with all of that snow.
Yeah, you have to be careful of that, because again, I always say sometimes if we see a really cold, so for example, this next winter, which we've already issued for our clients, we have kind of a coldish, dryish core winter for our area. Okay, so if there's going to be one area in the country that we think is going to have kind of a colder winter, because most of the country we do not have cold next year, is the Northeast. So we do have a potential, but we have it kind of cold and dry.
snow lovers watching, by the way, are jumping for joy right now, just so you know. Go on. I'm sorry.
I said cold and dry. No snow.
Oh, cold and dry.
Right.
But
so
some of your
snow
snowier winters actually come in winters where the precip is below average.
Well, I know. So that's the point, right? There's a lot of scenarios where a cold winter does not necessarily correlate to a snowy winter, at least in some areas here in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast coastal areas. So again, you can't have really cold, dry winters in the Northeast where you're just not getting any moisture, just dry air on the edge of whatever Hudson Low, if you want to call it that. So again, most of the country we actually have warm and dry, ish winter. So it's not we're not out there with a bullish winter for 2020, 21.
Yeah, I know. I often say, Bill, that this particular winter that we have just gone through, although we have not had very much in the way of cold weather, but I do remember in 1972-73 winter, and back then Joe and I were really big snow fans. We're not so much in our older years now, but back then we were awfully disappointed because a lot of the storms back in 72-73 seemed to pass underneath us. And that seems to be the case this year. We've even seen heavy snowfall in portions of Virginia and North Carolina, and we didn't get a single flake out of that system. So sometimes, and usually the cause is the cold air is just so cold and heavy that it kind of suppresses these storms to the south. So when you talk about a cold, albeit drier winter next season, my initial thought is, oh, he's probably talking about a suppressed jet stream that's going to be keeping the storm track to our south and keeping us just cold and dry. That's what the first thing that popped into my head.
So again, we're not actually predicting the jet streams or analog or any of that, right? I mean, but again, just rolling up statistics,
Just the
data
numbers.
and all that stuff, and analogs. Obviously, we're all leaning toward a moderate La Nina event. Seems likely, So again, that's just I say that's one of 24. I sometimes quiz the. We do a lot of work with some of the universities out here in Pennsylvania, the Penn States and Millersville and whatnot. But I'll quiz some climate scientists saying, name 24 climate cycles, and they're like, well, they're La Nina, PDO, AMO, and so they can rattle off maybe up to 6 or 10. But obviously, some of these are proprietary. So we believe that things that are happening in the Indian Ocean, ironically, is something we've looked at for 20 years.
So do you believe that we're on our way toward a La Nina pattern for later this year?
Yes, you already got La Nina and so PDO I think is already the coldest since 2014. Now, part of the problem here, what we get a little frustrated with just NOAA and governments that change data is very problematic for us. Like a lot of the ocean data is suspect, so they'll change it on you, so you're looking at maybe 2 different data sets. I mean, I can look at that right now and say this spot in the ocean is in theory below normal, yet another data set it's actually above normal because they changed what the normal is, what the average is. So that becomes slightly problematic for us when we're looking at oceanic indices. So we have some workarounds for that. But again, ironically, what's happening in the Indian Ocean, now you hear the MJO cycle, right? Back in my day, nobody even talked about an MJO cycle, right? They didn't even know what it was. It didn't even exist, I guess, back in the 80s. We didn't know much about it, right? Back in the 80s, we didn't know much about El Nino, La Nina.
It was you would occasionally see it you would occasionally start to see it in longer range discussions later in the 80s and going into the 90s, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. And I don't know. I usually find, again, this goes back to, I guess some people trying to wish cast in the short range, and they'll just, the Madden-Julian oscillation is in phases 8, 1, 2, and 3, or whatever it is, or 4, 5, 6, and 7. Therefore, this must happen, because you have A, then the outcome must be B. And
this winter that didn't work at all.
No, it didn't.
It didn't work at all. So my guys kept scaring me. They're like, Bill, is epic cold and polar vortex. It looks like it's coming in, in 2 weeks, and here we're forecasting, really hot, and I'm like,
Bill Goodman, who's the forecaster at the Weather Service here at Upton on Long Island for New York City, for the New York City area, and we're good friends, and we talk all the time. And one of the things that he's always points out is the fact that, it's all fine and dandy to have all these things in the kind of phases that you want, but if it doesn't couple with what's going on, if what's happening in the Indian Ocean doesn't couple with what's going on in the Pacific, which doesn't couple with what's going on across Canada or North America and so on and so on, what good is it? Your premise breaks down.
Yeah. So again, I said I like what we do. The end of the day, I think the way we quantify, again, clients see our accuracy, and the neat thing is a client usually at this stage, after they've been a client for 2, 3, 4 years, that we never have an accuracy discussion. They know where we're going to miss. We're going to typically miss. We're about, we say 80 to 85% right. I think, like I said, right now this year we're trending at 86 to 88% right on our weekly year ahead. So they know, we're going to have a year. There's occasionally going to be a year where we're 75% right. So you've missed 25% of your weeks. We cringe, when we have years like that. But end of the day, clients are, paying quite a, our clients are typically 6 figures. So, right, if you're wrong, they're not going to stick with you very long. So again, it's a function of, like you're spending a few grand a year, or, nobody's they'll forgive you. They're spending 100 to 300, 400, 500 grand. They're not going to forgive you.
You do seem charitable, Bill, because I know that there are clients who pay good money to get your information and get a handle and get an idea specifically for what they put out. But you're charitable in the sense that on weathertrends360.com on the dashboard, which I always look at every Monday, I look forward to it. That's the highlight of my Monday, actually, is to take a look at what you've got posted there. And you sometimes come up with long-range trends and give some ideas as to what to expect in the coming months to the average person who's not paying a cent to you for that information. Last week, we showed all of our viewers your projection of hurricane activity, for example, based upon La Nina, and your map showing the curvature of the storm tracks relative to the eastern seaboard. So there are some things that you do allow those of us who are not clients to see. Although I did get a big kick out of when I went to your site earlier today, when you said that when people ask you about how you do this or what the secret is, you said, we're going to tell you, but then we're going to kill you.
Well, that was what Schwarzkopf told me in the back of the day in the 80s, right? I could tell you, but I'm going to kill you because we had, obviously our top secret SCI, right? My wife always used to ask me that question, like, tell me about the aliens, I said, well, honey, I can tell you, but I got to kill you. Well, so hurricanes are interesting and we are concerned, but I want to say, caveat hurricane forecasting. If there's anything called dartboard science, hurricanes are dartboard science, right? Hurricanes are, we all put out the numbers, right? There're going to be 20 storms, 3 major hurricanes. The one thing we do well, the problem with the numbers today is that, last year, 2 years ago, we had 18 storms. And we had Florence and Michael that destroyed the Carolinas with flooding and destroyed the panhandle of Florida. Whatever, 50 to 80 billion in damages to the US because of those 2 major hurricanes. Last year, you can say we had 18 named storms as well, but other than Dorian in the Bahamas, not a lot of impact. And again, 8 of those storms, we all know, lasted for less than a day. So, 50, 60 years ago, before satellites, right, we never even would have named some of these storms because we wouldn't have known they existed. So the problem today with the numbers is that it's, again, kind of dartboard. Who cares, right? So theoretically, the last 2 years were the same, in terms of numbers, but totally different in terms of the impact. So we're pretty good at identifying areas. We always say our bigger strength is just kind of saying, we think 2 years ago, for example, several years ago, we said the Texas area and the Caribbean. Well, that was Harvey and the destruction of the Caribbean. 2 years ago, we said the North Carolina coast, and we said the panhandle of Florida were our targets. Last year, we said it was going to be the Florida, Bahamas, and Bermuda was our high-risk area. And this year, we've shifted that north to the Northeast New England coast. Whether that entirely happens, it's the area of concern is shifted to the New England area. So again, it's something to watch. Things have lined up for that to be of concern.
There'll be a trough in the
parallels to 12.
There'll be a trough in the east if that's the case.
Yeah, and our summer forecast is not blistering hot. We have it above normal. So July, August. I'm just looking at here. July, August, September-ish. We have kind of above normal, but cooler than last year. So I think we have the coolest in 3 years. Ironically, we have the summer the coolest in 3 years and the driest in several years for the Jersey, New York City area. But our big threat areas of wet weeks are in that September, right? So September, we have almost every single week really wet along the East Coast. So that's just kind of we saw that with Katrina. Walmart made gazillions, $130 million, I think, when we predicted Katrina a year in advance. In theory, we had said it would hit the North Central Gulf, major, kind of a Camille year. I don't like analogs, but that year we did see a lot of parallels to 69, and it happened in 2005. And you can remember, I don't remember that Walmart actually had their trucks in there within 24 hours, and FEMA was in a week later. So Walmart sang our praises for that year. That was, again, some decade ago, but it works to some extent.
I got 2 questions from the chat board. Scott Briller, who we refer to as the chairman because he's almost always the first person on the chat board every day. And he's also in charge of Briller Jeopardy, which we play toward the end. He said that on your captain's log, which you post on Facebook, on your captain's log, you spoke of with the situation, of course, with the coronavirus, that when the temperature gets to 77, it should have effects on positive effects on the coronavirus in the sense that it would lessen the outbreak. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, not my number. We had a client, one of our Wall Street financial services client.
When you say just so I want to be clear, so the 77 was not the temp you quoted?
I don't agree with the 77.
Oh, okay, all right. No, go. I'm sorry. Go on.
So financial services client, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure where the research came from, but obviously there's a lot of noise out there that, that this, that, be honest, a lot of people just simply don't know because it's the first time a virus has gone from animal to human. So the first year jump, right? You just kind of don't know. So he had research that basically said 77 was kind of the kill temperature for this virus. Well, let's just assume that it's a flu-like virus, right? It is fundamentally a flu-like virus. It's slight derivations. The flu virus, a lot of interesting study. There was a Harvard study that actually put rats and pigs and tested them at certain temperature and humidity levels. This was a Harvard study. I don't remember the year. But what they found was that when the temperature went above 43 degrees, I believe, and the humidity was high, 70, 80%, the virus simply died. It did not survive as long. So the pigs and the rats, or pigs and rats that were in the cages with those temperatures and humidity, actually did not transmit the virus amongst themselves. Now, the pigs and the rats that were in the other cages that were in the 20s and 30s with low humidity, dry, actually they spread the virus like crazy. So this was a flu type A, type B type study. What ultimately the research suggested was that when you got above 68 degrees and high humidity, game over. It didn't matter if you had a rat totally infested with the flu virus, it did not spread. Probably because it didn't survive on the surfaces, so it couldn't be spread amongst themselves just by touching things, and it wasn't spread through, your breath or, not that a pig or rat sneezes, but their moisture coming out of their mouth. So the virus did not spread. So that study actually says that it's kind of 40 to 50 degrees is the kill temperature for virus. And I say kill. It's not that it's killing it. It's just that it doesn't survive on surfaces as long as it does if it's, if it's 20.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's why if you think about the flu virus, type A, type B, temperature flus, we get it in the wintertime because several things. It survives for 2-3 days on a door handle, a gas pump, a shopping cart, right? So you touch it, you touch your eye, you probably got the flu because it's stayed on that surface for up to 2 days. Whereas when you get really hot, even in Florida, so right now what you have, it's really hot in Florida. So the virus probably isn't surviving on a surface, but now you're getting it from human to human. So once the humans interact with each other, then you're going to just get it from natural, right? You sneezed on me, I'm probably going to get the virus, even if it's 90 degrees outside.
Right.
But if you look at the numbers, you're not seeing it like in the tropical environments, Africa, Hawaii, right? It's just not spreading as quickly as it has been here in our. Now, thank God this is kind of happening now as we're getting out of our flu season, as opposed to Australia, where they're just going into their flu season. So, in any event, there was another research study, even just recently out of Hong Kong, that was showing same trend. Above 50, they say this virus does not survive. That was just a recent research out of Hong Kong. So, again, the problem now is you just got to go. The human piece is going through, right? Just the contagions of human to human.
Right.
So you're probably not going to get it. If it's 90 degrees in Florida and you touch the gas pump, you're probably not going to get the virus. If you did, it lasts for a minute, and if you didn't touch your eye within a minute, you probably don't get the virus that way. Now, someone sneezes on you at the gas pump, game over, right? You're probably going to get it. So,
gotcha. All right. So Johnny Quest, who's also one of our regulars here, he lives in the mountains of northwestern Virginia, and he's got elevation where he is. I think he said he was up around 3,000 feet. He was just wondering whether you do any analysis for that particular area, and if you do, what are you seeing with regards to that area?
Well, again, so I got 32 million of those spots. So it'd be hard to fix that. So what we typically do, right? So as we all understand in meteorology, there's only so much weather reporting stations, right? They're usually at airports or weather service offices, or we typically do not use the kind of cooperative network. We need really good quality data, reliable every day, no missing data, and that goes back at least 125 years. Right, so we'll fill it in with some spots, but basically what our process is doing is filling up let's say Harrisonburg, Virginia, and Dulles, and all the surrounding areas around this particular location. And then there's a lot of interpolation going on, right? We'll use GFS reanalysis data, elevation changes, right? So we'll actually have a weather history for your mile on top of a mountain, but again, it's a mile grid. So we're going to assume that your elevation's, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 to 2,500 feet. So it's all probably a pretty high mile grid that you're in. So that's how our process would interpolate, because there's no weather station probably at that elevation. So yeah, we have a forecast for that. I would say the one free thing that we have is the mobile app is free. The 360 Pro or Lite, one's free, one's 99 cents. It would actually have your location. So it'll give you some idea of the year ahead. So it's again kind of the, you know,
Yeah,
not the real.
and you can get you could link to that on weathertrends360.com, correct?
You'll find well, it's in the App Store. So the
Oh, in
Google
the
Play
App Store.
or
I'm sorry. So, but it would be under. So search what?
WT360 Pro or is $1, 99 cents, and WT360 Lite just has ads. I can't control those ads, so
Right.
people scream at us because it's dancing hula girls or whatever. I'm like, sorry, I can't take those off. Thank you, Google. Um, yeah, no, that's one source. We have another cool tool in our alert section on our website that you can actually go in. It's kind of a little vacation planner, so you can go in and say, I want snow and 30 in Aspen, right? And it'll come back and do the math and say, these are the 3 best weeks in the year ahead for snow and cold, or snow and 30 in Aspen. Or you say, I want 90 and sunny in Aruba, right? It'll give you the 3 best weeks statistically that we think in the year ahead for those conditions. So it's a global little vacation tool. It's free. You can do it all day long, right? It just to constantly tell you the 3 best, what we think are the 3 best statistical weeks for what you're looking for. And that plays to our strength too. It is. So when you let us pick the date for you, like you just tell me you're going to go on vacation, I mean, it may not be that great weather-wise, but if you go in and say, I want warm, dry weather, that plays to our strength. We're pretty good 85% of the time that period would be a warm, dry week.
Gotcha. Joe, you were
I
going
read,
to
I
you
read
go.
somewhere that I read somewhere where the Farmer's Almanac, they do their forecast actually like 18 to 24 months in advance for a given year. Like for example, this particular point in time, we're in 2020, they may have already have worked on their forecast for 2022. But from what I'm reading into you, you're doing a statistical type of deal based upon the current year and years past. Is it possible for you to, for example, jump more than a year in advance? Like, let's say, give an outlook perhaps for 2022 or beyond, or are you confined to that 1 year interval for your forecasts?
We have a handful of clients, some real huge national retailers, global retailers that do ask for at least a high level year 2 outlook by week. So here's the problem in that though, and I understand why they're doing that, right? So if you're just looking at a solar cycle, and this is the danger of just looking at the solar cycles, the moon cycles. You mentioned someone that looks at planet cycles. The challenge in that is that we are at a solar minimum. We know that, but the problem is it's a 7-year potential solar minimum. We're at the bottom, but there's a lot of things. You can look at some years that are brutal, cold, snowy in the middle, and they are typically in solar minimums. You tend to have brutal, cold, snowy winters here in America. And that was one of the reasons why everybody jumped on the 2013-14 analog and then the solar minimum, and they were just going crazy that this was going to be the epic winter of all time. And we're out there saying, below average snowfall, like kind of praying that it was going to be below average snowfall because
Well, you got the polar vortex in the stratosphere wrapped up like a tight little ball right toward at the very beginning of January. I don't see. I don't remember anybody even remotely considering the possibility that would happen.
and we may not even know, right? I mean, I think that some people argue this was the record strongest polar vortex, at least that we've observed, right, recently.
Right.
So
Record also with respect to the North Atlantic Oscillation, 4 or 5 standard deviations from the mean, and 230, 240 knot westerly winds, jets making cross Atlantic travel in record
or
time.
speed.
Yes, and of course crawling on the way back.
Yeah, right.
My uncle was on a flight coming from Milan back to New York. This was before all this coronavirus stuff started, and he was what normally is about an 8 hour flight wound up being over 11 hours, which is crazy.
So to answer your question, really, yes, you could. So I'll show you how you could do that. So, for example, this year we were confident that March would be, I think we had it like the 4th warmest March in 35 years. That was our long range forecast for March this year. Turns out it's probably going to be the 3rd, maybe 2nd warmest March in 35 years. So it's a really warm March. What we would do in our statistical process to make a year 2 forecast is say, let's just assume that we're going to be right. 85% of the time. We're going to assume that this March is going to be, a year ago, right? So a year ago, we could have said, okay, we know March with high confidence is going to be a warm, snowless March in 2020. What are we predicting for 2021? Well, let's put that March forecast day by day, week by week into the process and now project March of 2022. So yes, in theory, we can do that, but you're going to introduce obviously error. So if there's 15% error, at least in the March 20 forecast, now you're probably going to have 30% error in the March 2022 forecast. So you'd be off, you're going to have degradation in your skill going out 2 years because you're never going to be exactly right. If this March turned out to only be a degree above normal, that's a very different statistic when we're making our March 2022 forecast. Now, this March has turned out to be, again, one of those near one standard deviation above average Marches, a really hot March. That kind of is going to trigger a statistic to say next March, guess what, is probably, at least in the Northeast, a cold, snowy March. So,
well, what do you see for April?
Right now, our forecast only goes through the beginning of March 2022 next year. We don't have April yet.
No, but what did you have for April, this coming April? April?
New York, New Jersey area, a really warm start, maybe a slightly cooler finish, but an above average April for sure. We have a warm spring. We had March, April, May warm, and we laugh at. I won't mention their name. One of our bigger competitors. They're really not a competitor.
It's funny you should say it because right before you said that, it was kind of running through my head with my next question.
Yeah, we panic, right? I mean, because when a huge competitor that's they're not a competitor because they don't predict sales, right?
Right.
Nobody really is competing us in that reach, and our clients don't really care. If I tell a client that hey, it's the warmest, third warmest March in 35 years, they're like, meh, okay. What's that mean for me? I sell AutoZone batteries, wiper blades, shorts, beer. Anheuser-Busch is a 20-year, 18-year client, right? They actually interesting thing. So we have this thing called the power of 1 degree. So every 1 degree warmer, you drink 1.2% more beer. We can talk about that.
Really?
If it's 10 degrees hotter, you're going to drink 12% more beer. So what Anheuser-Busch does is they actually take about a third of what we say. So if we tell them a given week is up 10% in March and April, they'll typically plan beer production up 3% in St. Louis. Now, the neat thing about them,
I never knew. That's really interesting. I mean, I knew about retailers because retailers, as far as the wintertime, they like it cold because people buy winter clothes. So if they know a cold winter's coming, they're going to stock up with clothes. But I didn't realize that carried over to beer sales and those other things.
Everything you buy. We've done this 10,000 categories, so it's now you say winter, the people that like a warm, dry winter are the Home Depots and Lowe's and those types.
Because you could work on your house.
Right, because they want. So really a Home Depot, if you look at their sales trends, they want warm, dry weather kind of year round. Now they don't want drought, but I say dry meaning you can get out and build your deck, your gardening, your mowing, right? So no drought, but dry, not a ton of rain. And they love hurricanes. They love hurricanes that threaten but don't hit. So Dorian was a good one, right? I mean, Dorian was going to destroy Florida. Everybody on Earth bought a boatload of stuff in Florida to have it totally miss and do nothing. So think about that for Home Depot. No stores were damaged, and they sold a boatload of supplies, right? So that's the whole grail of perfect.
It's like all the people today with their toilet paper, in a sense.
I sat there and I'm like, really? I need to go out and buy. I was at a Sam's Club and I watched a lady with literally 24 rolls. I'm like, you have 400 rolls of toilet paper. Now I think she's a genius because it's hard to get toilet paper, but yeah, that's crazy.
How about join us with for a little Briller Jeopardy? Are you ready?
So how does Jeopardy work?
Okay, so we'll just a question about New York City weather, statistics, and Joe and I go at this every day. So today's Briller Jeopardy answer is the number of days this winter that Central Park had a temperature lower than 32. Okay, the number of days at Central Park had a low temperature lower than 32.
If you give me a few seconds here, I can tell you that. But
no, don't cheat now.
I'm not cheating. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. But I can tell you.
All right, so
I have a feeling there was not too many.
Well.
All right, so I can tell you here in a second. Let's see this. You didn't tell me I had to do. I was a quiz here. But again, I don't know. Let's see. We'll go 120 New York City. Let's see what this says. So below 32, there's one. Actually, more than I thought. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3.
Oh, he's going to get counting them one by one now.
That's not
Nice.
5, 6. Well, I use 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Actually, more than I thought. I mean, 32. A low 32 is not that abnormal.
Well, Joe, how many do you think?
17, 18.
While Bill's counting, how many do you think? Lows
below,
of 32
below
or
32,
less.
below 32 for this whole winter season?
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, up here in Putnam Valley today, our high was only 34, believe it or not. I'll say 10. Central Park now.
The answer actually is 25.
Yeah, I was gonna say yeah.
25.
Now, what's the normal?
You guys are from New York City. Normal low in New York City?
No. What's the normal number? No. The normal number of times it goes 32 or less in a given winter. And
See, I always say in my profession, be careful what you're good at, right? So, I don't know if I want to be good at this.
All right, so don't worry. It's sometimes Joe and I, we'll get a question that will rack our brains, and somewhere in the back of our memory, the answer will come up close. Actually, 68 times is the the normal number of times that the low in New York City is 32 or less.
Well, that's pretty good considering meteorological winter from December 1st to February 28th or 29th. That's 90 days. So we're talking about 2/3 of the time the temperature hits or goes below 32 in Central Park.
Yes.
But this year, what was it this year? This year's
25 times.
25 times.
Right.
Less than 1/3 of the time. Less than 1/3 of the time, it was below 32. That shows you just how warm this winter was for the tri-state area, for the New York City area.
By the way, did you get your 2/10 of an inch so that you could get to 10? Joe?
What?
Did you get your 2/10 of an inch?
You know what, Joe? I probably did when I woke up.
Well, I saw the picture, so I would say you did. I saw the picture you sent me.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we had initially when I woke up this morning it was about 1/10 of an inch, but then it melted away. But then we had sometime around noon or 1 o'clock, it was snowing to beat the band so hard, in fact, that whereas I usually just get in this type of situation snow accumulation on my wooden deck, it snowed so hard at noon and 1 o'clock that my blacktop driveway actually ended up getting coated. So probably I ended up with 2 or 3/10 of an inch, which means
you got it then.
This season I ended up with probably around 10 inches. I was kind of hoping that we would keep it below 10 so I could actually say that I had a winter where I had less than 10 inches of snow, but it looks like that didn't work out.
Yeah, we were working on your single digit. You didn't, yeah. I'm still deep in single digit land. I'm at 7.3. I had about 15 flakes. I did witness them, and I had a witness who witnessed them. Long Island is such a strange place. As I've lived out here for 30 years, and I've had some really incredible winters out here, and I also learned how the old stereotype forecast about snow getting less at the coast that may apply to the Jersey Shore. It doesn't apply to Long Island. This has got a very strange microclimate, and it's weird. What's that?
Just again, it's funny, the Jersey folks, right? We have a couple of fans, we got, I don't know, some 60,000 fans on Facebook, but a lot of Jersey fans. We got a lot of fans in like Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Well, Lancaster, Pennsylvania is like a snow hole. They get about 17 inches of snow, and every year Joanne's asking for this big year, and I'm like, Joanne, you only get 17 inches. That's your normal. So when you have expectations of 60 inches, that's just not going to happen very frequently.
Yeah, they're in a funny spot there, because when you look at that part of Pennsylvania over the course of 40 or 50 years, you kind of average out the numbers. The averages go up as you go west. Once you get west on the other side of the mountains, excuse me, then they drop. Then they go up again as you move up, across interior eastern and northeastern Pennsylvania and on up northeast into southern New England. And Philadelphia sits in that kind of a snow hole too, because they basically miss out on anything that's coming in from the west because it dries out over the mountains as it tries to go over the mountains, and they usually are too far west when it comes to lows redeveloping out in the ocean that throws snow back. So there, yeah, that's not a good spot to be in.
Right.
I have discovered over the years, however, for Long Island, it's actually a very good spot to be in because I oftentimes do tap, although it hasn't happened in the last few years, but a lot of times I tap that intensification that goes on, and I'm out in Suffolk County, so and I actually am above sea level. I am about 150 feet above sea level where I am,
Oh, wow.
because it goes up to about 450, and out here that's a mountain, and it has impact.
Right. No, again, sometimes it's a few hundred feet will do you, help you.
Well, I just want to say, Bill, thank you very much for taking the time out to join us tonight. You're certainly welcome anytime to come on. It's weathertrends360.com, correct?
Yep, that's it.
And also, you can download your apps on Google Play and on the App Store, correct?
Yeah, iPhone and yep, both Android, yep, and iPhone, yep.
Okay, so when they go to search you on there, what should they search?
Just WT360 Lite free, and then WT360 Pro is $1. Just it takes off the ads. So either way,
Okay,
they do the same thing. You're ahead everywhere on Earth.
awesome.
Not our client forecast, but it's a consumer friendly forecast.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for taking out the time. Really do appreciate it. And
Sure.
Joe and I would love to have you back one day.
Okay, well, guys, everybody stay healthy.
Now,
God
wait a
bless you.
minute now. Before we all leave, this is for the captain. Thank you so much, Captain Kirk.
Wait,
All
what
right,
was
live
what
long
was
and prosper,
what
right?
was? I'm not a star. I wasn't a Star Trek thing. What was
Maybe I
the
can't even do it. So
what
maybe
was
ask me to
Spock's
do
thing?
it.
Was that this?
I can't do it. So my 4-year-old can do it, but I
Oh
can't.
yeah. No, I'm a big uh
Ah,
oh my God. I can't believe I'm having a senior moment now. Big Bang Theory.
right.
Sheldon was always a Leonard
Sheldon.
Nimoy fan, especially when he got Leonard Nimoy's DNA on a napkin from the Cheesecake
He's freaking
Factory.
out right now, right? He's a germaphobe, so he's like in a bunker right now.
Oh, good God, yes, exactly. Well, look, stay safe. Hopefully, we will be allowed to leave our homes eventually and get back to normal. And Joe, we'll see you tomorrow night, as
Yes, sir.
always. And
We will.
take care, everybody. Good night.